Do you sometimes feel like you're just not strong enough to be a better person? Like you're lacking a skill that everyone somehow magically has, but you're just not making any progress? Do you ever feel like you don't have enough power to be the best version of yourself, to be great, and to fulfill your potential? If that's you, and if you relate to what I just said, then I might have the answer for you. Right now, as you're watching this video, you're being controlled by one very powerful force. It's manipulating everything you perceive, your relationships, your work, life, everything. It's something that has been with you ever since you were a child, that has been building up for years. It's something that we like to forget when we're on a self-improvement journey. It is your dark side, your own shadow. When we're on a self-improvement journey, we usually like to focus on the positive things. We like to focus on the progress we're making. We like to think positively. And that's great. It's amazing to think positively. And if you just only deal with negative stuff, then you end up in thought spirals, and that doesn't move you forward either. Dealing with your dark side doesn't mean thinking negatively, because that's what a lot of people think. They think that dealing with trauma and pain just leads to falling into dark pits and dark holes and just never being able to escape out of them. But that's not the case, quite the opposite. When you actually deal with your dark side, with your shadow that we all have, even the most positive, bubbly people have this side. Maybe they've integrated it very well, but they also have it. Once you deal with that part, you are actually more powerful than you could ever be if you just focused on the positives. The shadow is also part of your personality, and by keeping it down and just bottling it up, you're neglecting parts of yourself. If you haven't dealt with your shadow before, it's very likely that right now it's sucking away power that you could use to improve yourself and become the highest version of yourself. So today I'm going to show you tools, and I'm going to explain to you how to actually identify that shadow and that dark side of yourself, and then how to confront it and integrate it into your personality. So what is this dark side? The dark side is basically everything that you consider messy or flawed or wrong about your personality. So it's basically what society tells us is not right about us. And as soon as we are able to think, basically, we get taught what is wrong and what is right. So we're being praised for good behavior, and we're being punished for those wrong, flawed parts of ourselves. And what you have to imagine is that as a child, you learn really quickly what is right and what is wrong. So society tells us pretty early on what is wrong and flawed about our personality. So imagine as a kid, you broke something and then you were frustrated and angry, and then your parents sent you to your room. You learn from that situation that it's wrong to show anger and frustration. But that doesn't mean that you will never be angry or frustrated again. It just means that next time you're probably not going to show that. And instead, you kind of can imagine it as like an invisible bag that you carry over your shoulder. You put that anger and frustration into that bag and you hide it away and you keep it bottled up. And that happens every time you do something that is considered wrong. So you can imagine by the time you're an adult, you have a whole lot to carry. But by carrying around that bag and denying that dark part of yourself, you're actually hurting yourself. You're ignoring and denying parts of your personality. Your shadow gives you death. It's a dimension you're taking away from yourself if you don't face it. And it takes a whole lot of energy to just keep bottling down all these parts. You can imagine if you have that big bag and you're constantly trying to not let it rip apart and that parts of it come out, you're just wasting a whole bunch of subconscious energy on that you could use for other things if you actually opened that bag and actively, consciously faced it. If we don't face that bag, that can lead to issues in relationships, that can lead to depression and loneliness and a feeling of emptiness. Because, of course, we're feeling empty if we just basically ignore half of our personality the whole time. If we are working with our shadow, all this energy that is right now being used to kind of keep that bag over your shoulder sealed will be released. And imagine how much energy you will have in order to actually improve and make positive changes in your life once you deal with your shadow. This can improve not only your mental and emotional health, but also your physical health, because carrying this mental luggage is also affecting your physical health. That has been proven by science. Not only that, dealing with your shadow will also make you feel more whole, because of course, there's basically two versions of yourself. That surface version, which is really positive and only shows the nice traits of your personality, and that inner version that includes all these dark parts. And once you integrate them, you will actually be a whole, and you will not feel like there's something lacking anymore, because a lot of the times what we're searching for in others or in certain activities, in a job maybe, is actually found in ourselves, and that can be that shadow that we're so desperately ignoring every single day. Your shadow gives you substance. Your shadow gives you a whole other dimension, and it makes you more real and more flawed and ultimately more beautiful. One reason why this world is really shallow is because we're all trying to hide our shadows. We're all keeping them locked away, bottled up in our little bags that we're carrying, or bigger bags, depending on the person. And basically that kills all form of genuine connection. If we're only showing half of our personality at most, we're not actually showing ourselves. We're not being authentic. And trust me or not, other people notice that. That's a reason why trauma bonding is so powerful. If you talk about things that actually hurt you, things that are flawed about you, and that other person shares those parts of themselves as well, then there's a whole nother level of connection happening, because you are connecting those dark parts of your personalities, not just the positive parts. Because connecting these positive parts is easy because they're, gentle, they're nice. But actually showing someone your weaknesses, your shortcomings, is much more brave and also much more powerful. Also, if you're walking around and you're never sharing your dark version, you're also not going to see other people's dark versions. So you walk around, and if you know it or not, your mind knows that these people have shadows as well. And if you don't talk about their shadows, then you can only imagine what their shadows are. And imagining something always leaves more room for possible horrible things than actually facing them and actually seeing them. That's the reason why we're so afraid of the dark. We can't see. But once we face, once we see into other people's souls, we might see a lot of darkness, but it's always better to actually see it than to just imagine it in our minds. And actually getting to know the dark parts of a person makes you see that person as a whole. Oftentimes our positive and negative characteristics or traits perfectly align with each other. They are interacting with each other. For example, if someone is really compassionate and always looking out for others, always looking out for the way other people are feeling, and just really sensitive around others, that might be rooted in something that they're carrying in their little trauma bag, in their little darkness bag over their shoulders. For example, depression. Someone is depressed, and so they're in that part they're trying to hide, and on the surface, they're being really compassionate because they know exactly what the signs are when someone's not feeling well, because they have that inside themselves. So actually seeing where those beautiful parts of a personality come from makes them possibly even more beautiful, because compassion is beautiful in its own, but knowing that it stems from a place of pain and depression possibly makes it even more beautiful, don't you think? Integrating your own shadow will make you form deeper connections, and it will also make you accept other people's shadows more. It will make you appreciate other people's positive parts more as well. Because a big problem with not facing your shadow as well is that we're usually projecting our own insecurities onto others. So basically, we subconsciously know what is not right about us and what parts we are not facing. And so when we see those very characteristics, those very behaviors in others, we tend to overreact. So that's basically an ego defense mechanism. Once your ego detects something in another person that is wrong with yourself, that it knows is wrong with yourself, it will fight. It will make you aggressive, and it will make you super distant from that person. But that person doesn't have anything to do. They're kind of acting as your mirror. And so maybe the next time you're really overreacting when someone is acting a certain way, think twice and think if that's maybe something that you struggle with yourself, that you have not yet faced. So in our dark side, there is a lot of potential, because usually those dark characteristics have a positive antidote. So they're not just negative, they also have a positive side to them, and understanding them will also make you understand your strengths more. It will just make you understand your personality as a whole. So if the dark side is so important, and if it's so important to open that bag, how do we actually do that? How do we integrate our dark side into our lives? First of all, it's important to do a little bit of preparation before you do that, because you can imagine if you've been carrying that bag for I don't know how many years, it's pretty loaded and it's a lot and it's very dark. So you first have to have kind of a strategy before you fully dive deep into this. What you have to know is the shadow is elusive. So in order to actually see it in that darkness of your own subconscious, we have to kind of shine the light of consciousness onto it. We have to actually pull it out into the light and look at it, and it will hide away from us, because that's what your ego is doing. It's trying to protect you from that dark side, and you actively have to go against your ego, go against those self-defense mechanisms, and brutally rip it out of that darkness and put it into the light. And if we do that, it loses its scariness, because it loses this power of potential that darkness usually holds. Before you do that, you have to be compassionate with yourself. Practice compassion and self-awareness before you open your bag. Because when you go about this dark side with a very judging mindset, with a very negative mindset, then it'll be really hard on you, because imagine all your flaws being laid out on a table and you just looking at them and judging them and feeling like you're the most horrible person ever. You have to be compassionate with yourself, and you have to understand that this darkness isn't just there because you just ripped it out. It's been there all this time, and by actually looking at it, you're making progress. And you have to remember that it might hurt in the moment to deal with all these things, to deal with all these traumas and all these shortcomings of your own. But you have to know that that is actually a step forward compared to what you've been doing in the past by just bottling it up and locking it away. So you can't be the enemy of your own shadow before facing it. You have to accept it as part of yourself. And so you might think, okay, how do I open up this bag? I don't even know what's inside of it. How do I lay all these things out on the table? I'm ready. I'm now compassionate. I'm now self-aware, and I'm now able to face my dark side. As I said, our dark side tends to come out uncontrollably anyways. So we're constantly getting glimpses into our dark side. For example, as I told you, in encounters with others, those things that tend to bother us the most are most likely disowned parts of yourself. And what is important here is that you don't confuse this with just when people are really acting cowardly. When someone's really being a coward and you're just angry, that doesn't mean that is a disowned part of yourself. There's a difference in reactions when you actually are confronted with a disowned part of yourself, when you're actually looking into a mirror. That reaction will be very inadequate. It will be impulsive, and it will feel as though it comes from some part of yourself that you're not really truly connected with. It might even feel like it comes from somebody else. That is how you know that that is a disowned part of your personality, and that is in fact part of your shadow. When being confronted with these dark parts, it's important to be honest. When we're being brought up, our sense of self is sort of being inflated. We're praised a whole lot, and we like to hold on to that identity. It's our ego trying to defend us. But when you're putting all your flaws onto the table, it's important that you identify with them, and it's important that you actually honestly accept them as being part of yourself. That inflated sense of self is actually there to serve a purpose. It serves the purpose of masking these deeply rooted insecurities. And that can take extreme forms, such as narcissism, for instance. People with narcissism have such a inflated sense of self that they can't even accept any form of criticism or even look the slightest bit into their own shadow. So it's really important that we deal with our own shadow in order to not have this inflated sense of self and this totally misconstructed identity that is not aligned with our real personality at all. Another way in order to open this bag of darkness is to watch your reactions. Sometimes you might freak out. You might be super frustrated from one moment to another. And what is really important is that whenever you feel that way, you analyze the situation. You look, what has led to this reaction of mine? Why have I reacted that way? Why did my reaction feel so out of control? Why am I this emotional? And you'll soon notice when you really spend time thinking about this, write it down, journal about it, that there are certain patterns to that. It's most likely very similar situations where these extreme reactions are triggered. And the more you do this and the more you journal about it, the more you deal with it, the easier it will become and the clearer you will get glimpses of that dark side of yourself. And the more you do this, the more often those dark bits will appear. And whenever you see them, it's important to accept them and honestly realize them to be part of yourself. The main thing about this is just adding consciousness to this, because this is the biggest problem with the shadow, that it's rooted in our unconsciousness where it can influence us. If you pull it into the consciousness, it loses its power. And when you see those projections that you're maybe making onto other people as what they are, simply projections of your own shortcomings, of your own disowned parts of yourself, if you see those extreme reactions to things as what they are, just reactions, emotions, and nothing that can really hurt or affect your sense of self, that is when you will actually gain power over your own shadow. So what I sometimes imagine shadow work as is that I'm a detective with a light and I'm walking through really dark streets that are my subconscious, and I'm looking for my own shadow in those dark streets. And it's basically a search. It's a process. It will take some time until you find those bits of darkness, because they're hidden everywhere and they influence everything you do. They are behind every corner in those dark streets. But the more you'll wander and the more you practice searching and identifying them, the better you will get. There are a ton of shadow work exercises on YouTube, for example. Alan Watts also said some really interesting things on that. So if you're interested, try to look more deeply into that. Maybe I'll also do a video on that, but this is just the first part. So what I want you to take from this video is this. It's only when we integrate our shadow, our dark side, when we can embrace the light inside our own soul. It's only when we make meaning out of our own trauma and our own pain that we can grow and learn from it. When we integrate our shadow, we realize that suffering and trauma is inevitable. Our whole world is full of it. The world is full of antidotes, of opposites, light and darkness, positivity and negativity. And by completely neglecting the darkness, we can't step into the light. Reflecting and facing your own shadow means making sense of it, and it enables you to be more powerful than you were before. Facing it might be scary at first, but it diminishes the power that your dark side has over you, and it will allow you to step into the best version of you, and that is what you want. So I hope that you guys found this video helpful, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.